Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew, and welcome back to Frames of Space. There is a strange paradox that's embedded in modern parenting, which is that, on paper, today should be by far the easiest time in all of human history for someone to raise children. After all, we have modern medicine, grocery stores full of food, educational resources everywhere, and more information about parenting than any generation before us. But yet, if you talk to almost any parent, you'll hear the same thing, which is that it feels overwhelming, isolating, and often harder than they ever expected. Not just logistically hard, but emotionally and psychologically hard in a way that's often difficult for them to even articulate. My guest today, Elena Bridgers, has a framework for thinking about why that might be. She explores motherhood through the lens of evolutionary biology and anthropology, particularly the idea of evolutionary mismatch. The basic idea of evolutionary mismatch is simple but powerful. Human beings evolved for millions of years in small, tight-knit hunter-gatherer communities with high levels of social support, high levels of shared childcare, and deeply communal lives. Our brains, our hormones, and even our social instincts are all calibrated for that environment, not that of our own. Because in a blink of an evolutionary timeline, humans have dropped ourselves into a hyper-individualized, post-industrial world. And a lot of the friction we feel in modern life may be the result of that mismatch. Elena argues that motherhood, specifically, is a great example of this evolutionary mismatch. Parenting today often happens in isolation, without the dense social scaffolding that humans evolved to rely on. Ours is a world of isolated homes, digital screens, and fragmented communities. And when something feels persistently hard across millions of people, across so many different cultures and so many different income levels, it is usually a signal that the environment itself may be misaligned with our biology. It is not simply that individuals are failing. One line that stuck with me from today's conversation was when Elena said that motherhood has been the hardest thing she's ever done, and yet it is also the one thing that the vast majority of women have done for basically all of human history. It is one of the most, if not the most, ordinary human experience imaginable. If something so deeply rooted in our species feels so uniquely difficult for so many, then that raises an interesting question. What changed? And that is what today's conversation aims to find out. Hope you enjoy. Elena Bridgers, thank you so much for taking the time to come onto this podcast. I'm very much looking forward to it.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
Oh yeah, one thing I just want to say is thanks for promoting the episode that I hosted with Reagan Arts Gray a while back on Substack. I'm still very proud of that one.
Yeah, I really liked that one. I haven't gotten through all of your content, but that was a great episode. And I'm always interested in hearing conversations where people are willing to dive into controversial topics and take a nuanced perspective that isn't just a knee-jerk emotional reaction towards picking one side or the other, and actually talking through why having a hard line stance in either position is harmful. And I thought that podcast was successful in that regard.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I really like about podcasts is that sometimes I find it easier to delve into those nuances because the back and forth is the sort of thing where you can neither fully agree nor fully disagree with the guest, and it creates this good balance between chemistry and tension at the same time.
That's true. It's more human than maybe article writing, or certainly much more than like posting something on social media, which is often just like, let's rage bait everyone into getting as many comments as possible and blow this
Yeah.
up.
And there are very few places in life where that is more true than the area of gender, because gender debates are often incredibly uncomfortable because of how high stakes the issues are. Like for example, sometimes I host episodes about economics, and like sometimes I agree with the guest and sometimes I disagree with the guest. But I would feel like if I agreed with the guest or disagreed with the guest, it would not fundamentally change the way that I act with people on a regular basis. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
when people are trying to make a point and they're trying to convince you something about gender, it affects the way that you talk to people on a regular basis, and it affects the way that you feel like you're supposed to act and what you think the right thing is. And as a result, it's a lot harder to talk about because when there are uncomfortable topics, it forces you to shift a lot of not just your worldview, but also your lifestyle at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, gender is a total landmine, especially in the current political landscape. I mean, like, you can't say anything about gender these days without somebody losing their mind. And it doesn't even really matter how nuanced your position is or what position you take. Like, someone's going to be upset and offended. And that also, unfortunately, makes for excellent content. I didn't start writing about, I mean, I wouldn't really consider myself a gender expert, or someone who, like, gender isn't my core topic. Motherhood is my core topic, but motherhood is gendered, obviously. And so I end up talking a lot about gender and gender from an evolutionary standpoint. And yeah, it was actually kind of shocking to me when I first started talking about these things, just what a lightning rod it was. Like, I didn't actually expect that to be the case, but it is. And unfortunately, I guess both fortunately and unfortunately, that makes for engaging content because controversy tends to drive engagement. And I think there was even like some study recently about the reason that we talk about things like gender and politics so much these days is because people leave the channel on. Like, when they start talking about things that are actually more important from a policy perspective, like economics or healthcare, people get bored and change the channel. But people are just like inherently fascinated by topics related to gender, I guess. So there you have it.
There's something you mentioned that I thought was interesting. Like when you started talking about motherhood, you were not expecting it to be as much of a lightning rod as it ended up being. Uh,
No,
are you
no,
ready?
really.
Go
You said
ahead.
before we actually started recording live that I could not be more controversial if I wanted to be. I disagree with you there, but I think that's fascinating that you think that. And I'm still fascinated by the fact that so many people think I'm so controversial. I really think that what I'm saying is like fairly data driven, objective. I'm just talking about my experience as a mother. I think my experience is reflective of many mothers' experiences. Like I'd actually throw the question back at you. Why do you think what I say is so controversial? Like
Are,
what's controversial in it to you?
all right. Are you ready to attract some more lightning? Because you said you
Sure,
didn't.
sure.
Yeah. All right. So yeah. Imagine like I'm gonna shoot lightning in your direction and see how you
Okay.
handle it. Yeah. So I'm gonna quote one of your articles right now.
Uh-oh.
Um,
Okay.
quote. Yeah. See, like I literally just said I'm gonna quote one of your articles, and that was your immediate reaction. Yeah. Quote, equality of the sexes is a noble goal. As my critics repeatedly remind me, we should all be incredibly grateful that feminism allowed us to vote, write, study, earn our own money, and have our own bank accounts. But I think we are increasingly running up against the limits of this definition of feminism because, taken to the extreme, equality of the sexes means avoiding sticky questions pertaining to sex differences, including both differing biological capacities and differing preferences. So, how would you define gender equality?
Well, I think the literal, like, dictionary definition of gender equality is the quality of opportunity, regardless of gender, right? And I agree with that definition. Like, I am all for that. I think that men and women should have equal access to opportunities. And that has not always been the case. I mean, even just a few generations ago in America, that was not the case. Like, I have had long conversations with my grandmothers about this, and I would not prefer to be in their shoes. Like I am not in favor of like a return to trad society. I think that many people are happier like in family configurations that resemble the ones that my grandmothers lived in. And I don't think that there's any shame in it. But that's like not my personal preference. On the other hand, I think that we have mostly achieved equal access to opportunity based on gender. That, I guess, people will probably take me to town for that in America. And like, I don't think we're at a point where like women are really being actively discriminated against in the workplace. I think you could even argue that maybe we get a leg up in some ways in some industries. But I think that it's basically just insanity to think that we're ever going to have equality of outcomes. And like we've shifted too much to focusing on outcomes, like that men and women have to essentially be fulfilling exactly the same roles and functions in society on average in order for us to consider that we've won the gender equality game. And I just don't think that's ever going to happen. And I don't think it's actually probably what most people want because of motherhood.
Yeah, okay, maybe, okay, hearing that out loud, maybe it doesn't sound as controversial as it did in my head. I think maybe part of the reason why some people perceive it to be controversial is because they define gender equality as equality as outcome, like equality of outcome, which I think is kind of like the sort of ivory tower academia type definition. Like, I guess I don't even know what I'm going to say is controversial because sometimes I lose perspective on what counts as controversial for any given year. I think the idea that we should be trying to pursue perfect like gender parity within all sectors seems kind of analogous to the idea that we should be trying to like achieve the type of perfect income inequality that you would expect from the popular conception of like communism. It's it's like a very ivory tower definition that misses that like there's a law of diminishing returns the closer and closer you try to get to like perfect parity or perfect ratios for any given sector or for any given demographic. Does that count as controversial?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's ivory tower to define things that way. I think it's more like political almost. And you know, like if you think back to like, you know, the Hillary Clinton campaign that was really so much about questions like pay parity, right? Like pay parity is a classic example of something that it's outcome based, right? Like you can give women access to equal opportunities as men, and still not end up with pay parity for reasons that have nothing to do with discrimination, but just have to do with individual choices. And so, you know, I think we do have very good data now showing that the gender pay gap is really about motherhood. If you eliminate motherhood from the equation, like if you look at people who don't become mothers or who can't become mothers, there is no gap. There's no gap. And so is that because women are being forced out of the workforce when they become mothers? Yeah, that's definitely part of it. But it's also because we are choosing to spend less time on economic labor because like we want to spend more time with our children, or we feel that we need to spend more time with our children, or we realize that actually the work involved in raising children is in some ways more important and more fulfilling than pursuing, you know, racing to the top of the career ladder, right? And so actually the choice to become a mother, the choice to spend more time with your children can be a very empowered choice that involves quite a lot of agency. And it shouldn't, like when we say things like, oh, we need to have perfect pay parity in order for the society to be gender equal, like, no, I disagree with that. And that's a controversial take in today's society, right? Because, you know, people really believe in things like pay parity. Now, again, if what we mean by pay parity is equal pay for equal work, then yes, we should have equal pay for equal work. Like a man and a woman doing the same job in the same number of hours should have equal pay. But women who are opting out of the labor force, who are opting to spend less time on paid work so that they can spend more time with children. Is that a problem? I don't know.
Yeah, it's Ruxandra Tesla put out a really great piece about how a lot of the pay gap, like the stuff that people would assume is discrimination when it comes to like gender wages and disparities there, like the vast majority of the explanatory factor is actually just motherhood and the ways in which women tend to leave the workforce as a result. I'll leave it in the show notes. It's very fascinating.
Yeah. And I mean, I am a huge advocate for making the modern workplace more motherhood friendly in a way that isn't just like paying lip service to like, oh, like you need to leave work a little bit earlier or maybe opt out of some late night calls, but like actually having, what, for one thing, paid leave in the US. I think it's shameful that we have zero paid leave. I mean, the data is very clear that, you know, paid leave is a good thing for mothers and children. And if you believe that, you know, children grow up to be the future engines of society, then I think it's a societal issue. I think also, you know, we could be doing more to allow mothers to come back to work gradually, have like part-time work options.
But you could theoretically make the argument that, you know how part-time work doesn't really pay as well as full-time work because of the incentive. So it's possible that if we encourage part-time work, that would exacerbate the gender pay gap to some extent.
It's totally possible. And I think we should be totally okay with that, because I think... And a lot of people, I mean, a lot of sort of contemporary quote feminists, and I say quote feminists because nobody even knows what feminism means anymore. But if we take feminism to mean the kind of girl boss type feminism that boils to the top of my social media feed, then there are a lot of women out there saying that, oh, part-time work is a trap. Part-time work is a trap for mothers. It just exacerbates gender inequality and the wage gap and all of these things. But if you look at the data, it's what mothers want. It's what mothers want. Mothers in the US, I think 75-80% of mothers in the US say that they want to work part-time, say that they think that part-time work when children are young is their ideal. And yet only about 15-17% of mothers are actually able to find part-time work when their children are small. Like, women don't want to totally opt out of the workforce and be 100% financially dependent on their husbands, because that is a risk. But they also don't want to be like working this like horrible double shift where you're doing full-time work at a full-time job and then coming back and you have to do all the house labor and take care of your children. And we can get into discussions of like, oh, this should be split 50-50, et cetera. It's difficult to do. It's difficult to do. And also, I think women just want to spend more time with their children. They don't want to spend that much time away from their children. The amount of time that is required to hold down a full-time job with a commute. And so I think we force a lot of women out of society, and we force women into this sort of bifurcated binary trajectories of either being stay-at-home mother or careerist working mother, like the trad wife versus the girl boss dichotomy, when in fact, the truth is that most women want something in between, which is also exactly how it worked for most of evolutionary history, as I've talked about a lot on my Substack.
You know, it's whenever we have these debates, it's like every single time one of my guests makes an argument, I automatically conjure like a plausible sounding devil's advocate in my head, where sometimes I agree with it and sometimes I disagree with it. Yeah, but the devil's advocate in my head right now is telling me I think I know what the girl boss feminist that gravitates to the top of your social media feed would say right now, where the reason why so many women want to spend more time with their children is because of false consciousness, where the patriarchy has essentially socialized them to want to attach much more of their identity into their role as a mother or their role as a wife or their role with the family. And I obviously I have a position on that, but yeah, do you want to talk about that, or should we just move on?
Yeah, I think that's totally ludicrous, because again, my expertise is in hunter-gatherer societies, and most anthropologists agree that hunter-gatherer societies are non-patriarchal. they're not necessarily matriarchal either, but they're neither. They're highly egalitarian. They have high levels of gender egalitarianism, but not in the sense like that men and women are playing the same roles, just in the sense that when men and women have like the same amount of power and agency in society, right? And in those societies, women spend a lot more time with children. Why do women spend a lot more time with children? Because we're mammals. Because women are the ones that have the babies, that breastfeed the babies, and we naturally are inclined to spend more time on childcare. Now, it's not to say that women in these societies are doing 100%. Actually, in many hunter-gatherer societies, the Aka is the most famous example of this, fathers are highly involved, much more involved than in many sort of transitional agricultural or other pre-industrial societies. But it's never 50-50. It's never been 50-50.
And
not
maybe
even
50-50 is an unrealistic goal that we shouldn't try to like see as like our main thing that we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I don't think, I mean, and again, like I know couples where it is 50-50 or even where it's like 70-30 with the father doing more of the work in the childcare. And I think that does work for people. But I think that's not a realistic goal for humans on average, given our long evolutionary history as mammals. I think mothers and children have a special relationship that is rooted in biology and in millions of years of evolution. And we might like it's inconvenient in contemporary society, or it's inconvenient to admit that fact when we're trying to build a sort of genderless contemporary society, but it's not working for people. It's not working. I don't think it can work.
Yeah, so maybe this dovetails into your level of expertise, which is hunter-gatherer societies. I remember when I started reading your articles, I really was taken aback because I do perceive you to have a much more rose-tinted view of hunter-gatherer societies than I've traditionally had. Like, I assumed that like I don't really know that much about this topic. So like my instinctive idea was that hunter-gatherer societies, like they lived lives that were even worse than what existed before civilization. Like I thought it was like an era of utter barbarity where things like murder and rape were just like ordinary facts of life. So could you enlighten me about some of the misconceptions that I might have or that people in general might have about hunter-gatherer societies?
Yeah, I think a lot of people think that way. And I'm not actually even really sure where that misconception comes from, but it simply isn't true. I mean, again, we don't know because we can't go back in time. We don't have like a window into the Paleolithic. But what we do know from studying contemporary hunter-gatherer societies is that they tend to be quite peaceful. They tend to be highly egalitarian. So not just like between genders, but between everyone in society. They tend to be highly cooperative and consensus-based. When it comes to child rearing, they tend to be extremely affectionate. They tend to have extraordinary respect for a child's autonomy and agency, much more than in most of our cultures, transitional cultures, and I would say contemporary cultures. And there were things that were probably quite difficult and painful and frankly horrible about living in the Paleolithic and living in contemporary hunter-gatherer societies, like the fact that there was like 50% child mortality, like I think 30% in the first year and 50% by the time a child reaches its teenage years. I mean, that is extraordinarily high and tragic. And so, you know, I'm not advocating for like a return to the hunter-gatherer life. Like I think modern medicine is wonderful for the most part. I enjoy living in in contemporary society. There are lots of benefits. But I do think that this phenomenon that I talk about a lot, evolutionary mismatch, is a real thing, right? Like,
Wait, could you explain the concept of evolutionary mismatch?
yeah. So it's the idea that, all humans lived as hunter-gatherers for like 95% of our existence as a species, right? And evolution happens really slowly. So our brains and bodies evolved to expect conditions that are similar to the conditions of contemporary hunter gatherers. And now you throw people into like, you know, post industrial capitalist America with like a smartphone, and we struggle because we're not wired for these kinds of lifestyles in many ways, right? So we don't have enough social interaction. We spend too much time on digital devices. We don't go outside enough. We don't exercise enough. We don't eat well. We give into all of our sort of worst desires that were shaped in this landscape of scarcity and in the contemporary landscape of abundance of certain things like high calorie foods and scarcity of other things like meaningful social connection. We're not doing so well, right? Like, I think, you can argue that physically we're doing better than the hunter gatherers, although even that's kind of a sketchy argument. Like, yes, we live longer on average, but our health span is much shorter. And mentally, we are not thriving compared with hunter-gatherer populations. Like, hunter-gatherer populations consistently score better than contemporary Westerners on measures of mental health, because they're living in a way that is more in alignment with our evolved biology.
That's interesting. So hunter-gatherer societies were not patriarchal, and they were not matriarchal either. So like,
Yes.
how would you describe the way that hunter-gatherer societies like decided who would lead the communities and like who got say in decision making and stuff?
There's no leadership. There's no leadership, which is the really crazy thing, right? I mean, and this is one thing that's just really hard for us to grasp in contemporary society. Like, how could they function without leaders? And actually, there's some really interesting passages in, I think it's the Ethnography of the Hadza by Frank Marlowe, where he talks about like the first encounters with Hadza people from like British and German colonial forces, where they were always like, take me to your leader. And they were like, who? No leader. And no one believed them. People couldn't believe that it was possible for them not to have a leader, but they didn't have a leader. People lived in groups of maybe 25 people, I think is about the average size of a hunter-gatherer group. And decisions are consensus based.
Yeah, so you're probably not gonna find this surprising to hear, but the more I dug into your commentary, the more fascinated I was about two things. One is the nature of hunter-gatherer societies and the ways that they are different today, but also like what got you started on this trajectory of being so invested in understanding hunter-gatherer societies in the first place. And maybe there's one quote from one of your articles that's pretty useful in trying to get you to understand where you're coming from. Quote, "The first thing you have to know about me is that I grew up in Princeton, close to the famous Ivy League university, in an achievement-obsessed culture. This matters because I strongly suspect that the achievement-obsessed among us suffer more with the transition to motherhood. So could you elaborate on this and like how you've changed from the achievement-obsessed version of you in your youth?"
Yeah, I mean, I think I am still kind of achievement obsessed. I mean, here I am on this podcast every day, like working my ass off to like write Substack articles, gain a following on Instagram, land a publishing deal at the top 5 publisher. Like, I'm still ambitious. Like, that hasn't disappeared. I think it's just part of who I am, and part of how I was shaped by the culture I grew up in. But I do think that I felt a little bit betrayed by my brand of girl boss feminism after becoming a mother, because I think going to Stanford and you're exposed to all of these like high achieving women, and attended all these conferences of women who were breaking the glass ceiling in the venture capital world. And some of them were mothers, and they talk about how they were like, going to back meetings and squeezing in pumping breaks, to pump milk for their babies in the car between meetings, and just the crazy, crazy lifestyle they were living. And that was kind of like my ideal. I mean, it's sort of what I felt I was set up to want, or what society expected of me, really, after having paid that much money to get a degree from Stanford. And after having a baby, I just quickly realized that was not what I wanted, that I was too tired and too in love with my baby, frankly, to want to put that much time and energy at that stage in my life into career. And so I think I struggled more with the transition to motherhood maybe than most women, because I had this achievement paradigm. And so it didn't feel like an option for me initially to just step back from my professional life and embrace motherhood. But B, I also was the kind of person who felt after having a baby that what I deeply mostly wanted was to just lean into being a mother for a little while. And then to come back to my professional activity, but in a way that was more meaningful and more balanced. And I didn't feel like I had a lot of role models for that. And I also was just kind of like, I just felt very lost for several years after becoming a mother. And I think that that sort of identity crisis is part of what led me to then looking into the evolutionary history of how we used to parent before society became what it is today. Also because I had a degree in human behavioral biology. And so I've always been interested in these questions. But my education didn't really touch on the topics that I write about, unfortunately.
Did you have to self-educate on these topics much later on?
Yeah, no, it really was after the birth of my son, so my first child, that I was like, I just feel like it just feels like something is out of alignment, doesn't make sense. Actually, it was birth of my son jarred me, but it was the birth of my daughter, actually, who came less than 2 years after my son. And that's when I was like, oh my God, I'm so overwhelmed and I'm so exhausted and I just can't make sense of my experience. And for some reason, and I really honestly don't know why, but for some reason, the question that I kept coming back to is, how did mothers do this for millions of years? Because the thing about motherhood is it is the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. And yet it is the one thing that every woman has done, not every woman, but the vast majority of women have done for, all of our existence as a species. That's why we're still here. It is the most human thing to do is to have a baby. And so I couldn't reconcile those two things. I couldn't reconcile on the one hand that this is just this incredibly normal and natural thing that women have always done, with the fact that it felt impossible. And I was like, so to me, that means there must be something wrong with the context in which I'm trying to mother. And that's why I was pushed into sort of looking into, okay, well, what do we actually know about how this worked before agriculture in hunter-gatherer societies, in the Paleolithic? What do we know from the fossil evidence? But mostly I just got obsessed with how mothers mother in hunter-gatherer societies. And so it was very much like a self-educated thing where I just started buying all of these academic books. I started reading tons of academic papers. I've done a self-directed PhD in Paleolithic motherhood and hunter-gatherer motherhood at this point.
Would you say that your knowledge of hunter-gatherer societies has helped you to become a better parent?
That's a good question. I think the thing is that my initial interest, and I would still say my primary interest, is not so much in like parenting strategies per se, as it is in trying to understand the mismatch between the social context in which we evolve to mother and the social context in which we are forced to mother in post-industrial America, Europe, whatever. And a lot of those things are, I think, helps to like the idea is to try and help explain why contemporary motherhood feels off or feels so hard. And a lot of times there's not like an easy fix that comes out of that. Like my writing, the intent of my writing is like not to package neat solutions for people. It's just to like explain so that we can understand ourselves. And my hope is that, you know, some of it leads to more pragmatic solutions and outcomes than others. And some of it points more in the direction of policy change, although I tend not to get into that as much because it's very difficult. I mean, it's very polarizing and it's very difficult. I mean, even if
sometimes the most polarizing issues are the ones that's where it's the most rewarding to find a good solution to it.
Totally. And I do think that maybe I will go more in that direction in the future of my writing. That sort of like the initial purpose was to be like, this is how it used to be. This is how it is now. There's this mismatch. And that explains why it's so hard. And that explains why we have a certain number of, you know, whatever problems. And I think in the future, maybe I'll go more in the direction of exploring, well, then what can we do about it? And if we tried to fix it with policy A, would it work? Are these problems things that can really only be solved by communities, or can they be solved politically? Or are there things you can do about it in your home? I think it is probably some combination of all of the above. But that said, yes, I have made changes to the way I parent my children. Absolutely. One of the big things is that I bed share with both of my children. They are now 4 and 6 years old. That's not a very conventional thing to do. I personally love it. I started doing it after I started researching hunter-gatherer societies and learned that this is the way that parents in every hunter-gatherer society sleep with their children, starting from when they're an infant and through usually until they're maybe like 8 or 10 years old. It's very pathologized in our society to bed share with babies and young children. But I think it's good for children. I think it's a really sweet way of like spending time with them. So that's one change I made. Compared to like before I had done the research with my son, I went down the very sort of classic, like put him in a crib and then sleep train him when he's 6 months old. And I have some regrets about that. I also am a huge proponent of free play. I think children need time to play on their own, ideally outdoors, but can be indoor too, without screens and without parent involvement. I'm like a huge advocate of get out of your children's way and let them play. Children don't need you to play with them. If they want to be involved in your adult activities, like if they want to help cook a meal or do chores, that is absolutely to be encouraged. But they don't need you to build Lego towers with them. They actually need social interaction with peers. There's like, a developmentary trajectory to this. Social play doesn't really emerge until about age 3. But after kids are 3, they need social play with other children more than they need social interaction. They need social interaction with adults, but more than they need play with adults. And so, yeah, I make sure, I think kids today are overscheduled. They have too many extracurriculars. They spend too much time in school. They spend too much time on screens. I think we need to do a better job of structuring in blocks of time that are just for them to play and explore. And we need to let them take risks, like physical risks, climb trees, get hurt, reasonable risks. But the data is very strong on the fact that like, this is what children evolve to do. This is how they learn. And it's incredibly important for learning social emotional skills, and for mental health later as a teen and adult.
How do you think your time as a parent has changed you? Like, would you say that you've become like less argumentative, or like, would you say that being a parent has caused you to feel a loss of your own self-identity?
I'm definitely not less argumentative.
Good, but
if anything, I'm more argumentative.
All right, please keep that energy for the podcast. Remember the whole thing about keeping the audience engaged.
Yeah, no, I think motherhood sort of made me into a bit of a bitch, if you will. And that's, there's biology behind that too, right? I mean, I think, become more protective as mothers. There are like structural brain changes that, there's some debate on how long this lasts, but, it's adaptive for us to become fierce and protective. The stereotype of sort of the loving and docile mother is just bullshit from
like, do you think it's entirely bullshit or like partially bullshit? Do you think it's entirely bullshit?
It's entirely bullshit. I mean, if you look at any mammalian mother in the wild, like what's the stereotype of like if you run into like a mother puma, right? Like you should be 10 times more afraid of running into a mother puma as you should be of running into a puma that's not a mother. Like mammalian mothers evolved to be fierce and protective. And I think it's totally cultural. Not to say that. So, if you want to get into the biology of this, I've done posts on this, but basically when you become a mother, there are both changes in hormones and also structural changes in the brain, especially in the amygdala, which is the region of the brain that controls fear and aggression. The amygdala on average gets a lot bigger, it grows. And also there's an increase in oxytocin. And we know that both oxytocin and the amygdala have this really interesting relationship with behavior, in that more oxytocin and larger amygdalas tend to make people more affiliative and affectionate with close kin, and more aggressive with people who are not kin or who are strangers or who are outsiders. And that's exactly what happens in a mother's brain after she gives birth.
It sounds like being a parent ends up like exacerbating your own in-group, out-group differences.
Yeah, I think you could make that argument that it does. For better or for worse. But I do think that a lot of mothers feel it, that when they become mothers, they're edgier. They feel edgier. They might feel more argumentative. And a lot of women think, oh, there's like something wrong with me because I'm supposed to be all like, cuddles and love and flowers. Well, yeah, like you are supposed to feel incredible attachment and affection towards your baby. But you might also feel like you want to give everyone else a kick in the ass.
Yeah. All right. So then that obviously, so the topic of gender difference is something that I've talked about before, but since you've done so much research into hunter-gatherer societies, maybe you tend to be somewhat knowledgeable about the nature of like evolutionary biology. Which specific gender differences do you think are more a product of society, and which ones do you think are more a product of biology?
Oh, that's like a huge, huge, huge question.
Thank you.
I don't know if I'm qualified to answer that. I think that everything that is sort of related to the mother-infant bond is deeply evolved and biological. So if you think of things like obviously physiological things like pregnancy, birth, and then breastfeeding, which in hunter-gatherer societies lasts for 3 years about on average after the birth of the child. So we don't do anything near that in contemporary society. But if you think about the fact that that's sort of how things evolved to work, then it would have been necessary for most of human history for children under the age of 3 to spend most of their time in close proximity with their mother, because there were no breast pumps, there was no formula. So mother was food, right? And, even in traditional societies, typically children will start eating some form of like pre-chewed solids, maybe around 6 months. And as they grow, they breastfeed less frequently. So a baby in hunter-gatherer society will breastfeed extremely frequently in the first year of life. Like in Kung or Jahansi society, Melvin Connor did some amazing research on this, and like the average interval between bouts of breastfeeding in the first year of a child's life is like 13 minutes. So it's constant. So you can't be physically separated from your baby if your baby is breastfeeding every 13 minutes on average, like skin to skin contact. And now that's not to say that mothers didn't get a lot of help from society. They did. In certain societies like the Aita, mothers actually do as little as 25% of the active childcare when babies are small. But they always have to be in close physical proximity. So even though maybe older children are helping to carry infants or care for infants when they're not feeding, the mothers have to be there to feed. And then as the child grows older, the interval between bouts naturally grows longer and longer, so that by the time they're 2, they can go for several hours without breastfeeding. And so mothers are able to spend a little bit more time away from camp foraging. And then when they're 3, they go through this transition where they're weaned. And this is quite traumatic for many children. They don't want to be weaned. It's like a very intense experience. But then once that happens, they are left behind in camp to play with other children while the mother goes out of camp to forage. So she stops taking them with them when she goes out to forage. So it's kind of like Paleolithic daycare arrangement. But I guess what I'm getting at here is that this implies, and we know this is the case, that in these societies, for the first 3 years, children are spending a lot of time with their mothers. They're spending the first year really on her body most of the time. This is not a constraint on fathers. Fathers don't breastfeed in hunter-gatherer societies. They can't, there's no bottles, there's no way for them to perform this function. And so they are freer to do things that take them away from camp for much longer stretches of time, like long distance hunts, right? Whereas mothers do hunt in some hunter-gatherer societies, but it has to be a specific kind of hunting that is compatible with baby wearing and that takes place closer to camp, and that can afford to be interrupted by, calming a fussing child or breastfeeding. So it tends to be like net hunts in the Aita society, Aka society. I think both the Aita and the Aka net hunt. But net hunting is generally compatible with breastfeeding, baby wearing. Whereas the way that the Kung hunt, which is to chase down animals with poison arrows and spears until the animal is physically exhausted and can't run anymore. And these are like, they run marathon distances to chase down these animals. This just can't be done with a baby while wearing a baby and breastfeeding a baby. And so in societies like the Kung, you have these very strict gender divisions of labor where men hunt and women gather. And the reason for that is that women in hunter-gatherer societies spend most of their adult lives being either pregnant or breastfeeding. And the interbirth interval is much longer in these societies. It's about 4 years. But still, they're breastfeeding a child for about 3 years. So during that time, they have to be near that child. And then immediately after, they become pregnant with the next child. So this just structures so many aspects of society. And it probably structured everything in the Paleolithic too. I mean, what women could and could not do, what men could and could not do, what the gendered roles were of men and women in society was dictated by the biological functions of birth, of pregnancy, birth, and breastfeeding, which only women could do. And so yeah, when you look to those societies, and again, I think these societies tend to be impressively gender egalitarian in the sense that women have a lot of power and agency, a lot of input in group decision-making, a lot of control over their reproduction, control over who they marry, control over their work and their lives, it's still just the case that men and women fulfill different functions and have different roles because of biology, right? And I think that even though we now have birth control and we now have breast pumps and we now have, we could even do surrogacy if you like these tendencies, the sort of different preferences and tendencies between men and women exist because they were shaped differently by millions of years of evolution.
Okay,
we face different evolutionary pressures.
So maybe like women evolved to like be more like have a desire to be more nurturing and caring towards family members. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, it's complicated, right? Because when you look again at like the brain and hormonal changes that happen in a woman after birth, after the birth of a baby, these are like major like structural brain changes and hormone changes. And we know that affects behavior. And on the other hand, there is a whole emerging body of research. Sarah Hardy has done amazing work on this and written about this in her book, Father Time, about how men who spend a lot of time in intimate contact with babies, even though they don't go through the biological process of birth and breastfeeding, also exhibit hormone changes and brain changes. It lowers testosterone and it increases levels of oxytocin. And so but it's context dependent, right? So with a mother, like it's going to happen whether you like it or not, because you're the one that gives birth. With a man, with a father, it depends how much time he spends in intimate contact with that baby. If he's kept apart from the baby, kept away from the baby, then his body and brain won't undergo these shifts. And if he spends time with the baby, then those shifts will more likely occur. And so, yeah, the fathers change too. And fathers in many cultures, especially in cultures where intimate contact with babies is emphasized, are quite nurturing. But are they, on average, biologically as nurturing as women? I don't know. I mean, I think that, if you look at like testosterone, right, people are like, oh, men and women are the same. Like, the differences in average testosterone levels between a mature man and a mature woman are like pretty flooring. I think I have to look at the data again. I don't want to say something stupid here, but it's like a large multiple. These are not like overlapping bell curves, like, which is the case with a lot of things like math ability, for instance. It's like, women are like this much and men are like multiple times that. And so then you can ask yourself, well, okay, like how does the hormone testosterone influence behavior? Well, it's really complicated. It influences behavior in lots of ways. But one thing we know about testosterone is that it primes men to seek out status enhancing behaviors. And what confers status is culturally mediated. But if you live in a culture that values earning a lot of money, then you can bet your bottom dollar that men are going to be, on average, more interested in pursuing the highest paying jobs possible because of testosterone, right? And again,
or the highest ranking position in whatever field they want.
Or the highest ranking position in whatever fields, right? On the other hand, if you change the cultural norm so that suddenly like caring for babies is a super high status activity, then you would expect men to be more involved in childcare. But I think, part of the reason why, again, to go back to things like the gender wage gap, or why we see like differences in, representation of men and women at the top of certain fields, isn't part to do with the fact that, testosterone drives more status seeking behavior. And women are, I think, just more okay in general with doing work that is less prestigious and more just essential to the healthy functioning of the family.
I I just realized the girl boss feminist would say that the reason why those women are more comfortable like doing less prestigious work is because of their own internalized misogyny.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can make that argument and maybe that's part of it, but I don't think that you can, in all fairness, say that that's all of it. And again, if you tie this back to what we see in hunter-gatherer societies, then, women are consistently taking on kinds of work. So again, even when they're hunting, they're taking on kinds of hunting that are not only compatible with childcare, but that are guaranteed the highest return of calories per hour worked. So they're going after things that are the most efficient from a functional perspective, irrespective of prestige and status.
Whereas, they're doing it for efficiency and productivity and not for like prestige or status.
Exactly. They're doing everything they can to get their families the calories they need in the most efficient way possible while still caring for, their youngest children. Whereas the men are much more focused on big game hunting, which is a high risk but high reward activity that fails like 90% of the time, and is way less efficient, but very statusy, right? Because bringing down a big animal is a way to achieve status in many of these societies, right?
Do you think men evolved to be more risk-taking on average than women?
Yeah, I think that is one big difference that we definitely see in the data. There's plenty of research on this. Like testosterone is linked to more high-risk behavior, especially in adolescent males.
I guess, well, so a part of me wonders how much this is an explanatory factor for like male overrepresentation within the top ranks of like Fortune 500 CEOs or whatever. But maybe to tie it back to your area of interest. So like how, like, let's say like there's some percentage of women that have a desire to define themselves by their identity, like as a family member, maybe as a mother or as a wife. Do you think that society should encourage people to encourage women to have those desires to a greater extent, or do you think that like that idea is a product of like patriarchal socialization?
Mothers defining themselves as mothers,
that's part of it,
and not by their profession,
and not by their and like like okay. So do you think it is good for women to define themselves by their role in their family more so than by their career or by their profession or how they are perceived by society?
I think that men and women, both parents, I think that our culture in general is overly focused on achievement, status, money, individualism. I think we would all be happier, men and women, if we were a little bit more focused on family, community, friendship, interdependence, and working less hard if we can pull it off. I think that, I mean, is that more true for women than for men? I mean, I think that, in contemporary society where unfortunately the reality is that there are very few part-time jobs, there are more and more remote jobs, which I think is a good thing for mothers, but it can be very difficult for women and mothers to find jobs that are compatible with childcare. And I think in that case, the cultural message that like you have to stay in the workforce can be harmful. That said, there are plenty of mothers out there who would be unhappy. I include myself in this category. I think I would have been very unhappy as a full-time stay-at-home mother So I think I'm lucky to have found something that affords me a certain level of balance. But I do think, unfortunately, that achieving gender equality in terms of outcomes, given the way that we've structured work in contemporary society, would come at a very steep cost to children. Is coming, I think, at a steep cost to children. I don't think that the solution is to like say, okay, so now mothers, you should all just stay home. I think the solution is workforce reform. But I also think that it is very much a legitimate and often healthy choice to step back from work when your children are small as a mother, specifically as a mother. And again, a lot of that has to do with what I think is just, yeah, a bit of a special gendered relationship. Also, everything we know about the extraordinary health benefits, not just for children, but for mothers of breastfeeding, of extended breastfeeding. This is another one of my talking points in my Substack, is that it's inconvenient for us to acknowledge the fact that breastfeeding has so many long-term health benefits for women, because many women are unable to breastfeed, and most women will not meet their breastfeeding goals for many, many, many reasons that have a lot to do with, yeah, how we've structured work, but also the fact that we discourage co-sleeping, the way that we tell women to breastfeed with spacing feeds too far apart, et cetera, makes it very hard. But the fact of the matter is, like, we can't get, as much as we'd like to, as much as I'd like to, because I did not love breastfeeding, we can't get around the fact that this is our evolved biology. This is what our bodies evolved to do. It's very good for us, and it's very good for our babies. And so finding ways to like protect that are important from a physical and mental health perspective, both for mother and baby.
Like, you can't protect the fact that like you're unable to escape from like your evolutionary programming.
You can't just delete millions of years of evolution because it's inconvenient for the goals of contemporary society with regards to like gender equity, right? Like, it's not going to go away. Like, we can't just say breastfeeding doesn't matter and the science of it disappears, because it does matter. We have heaps of data on this.
Do you think we could like socialize women to be less interested in motherhood? Do you think that's possible? And do you think that would be good?
I think it is possible. I think it is happening. It's absolutely happening. It has happened. I mean, it happened even to me. I think I did not value motherhood as much before I started my sort of own research and deprogramming from my sort of girl boss feminist era. I think one of the
do you feel like you were overly socialized by girl boss feminists to like have the wrong desires?
Like I said earlier, I do feel like I was on some level kind of betrayed by that particular brand of feminism, because it led me to believe that only paid work was valuable, and that led me to feel that I needed to define myself by my professional achievements. And that made the transition to motherhood very difficult. Whereas I think if I had been socialized differently to believe that life is long, there's time to have a career, but also to lean into motherhood, to take a break, that motherhood is wonderful and meaningful, that it's valuable, and that it's maybe the most important work that a woman will do in her life, I think I would have had a different attitude coming into motherhood, and that I might have been happier and had an easier time with the transition. So, that said, I also enjoy having a career, and I think that we need women to work, because I think we need representation of women in every professional field. Like, I don't ever want to see a male gynecologist, you know? And like, so we need women to be able to make it through medical school. I think we need females who are lawyers, who are politicians. I think we need females who are in academia and doing research on women's bodies, right? Like, we can't have a gender equal society if we don't have at least some representation of capable women in all of these fields. So I'm not in favor of like a return to like women stay home with the kids and let men do all the work outside the home. But I do think that for some women, that feels like a healthy choice, and it probably is. And I say power to them. And I also think that we need to shift our entire society in a direction of being more family oriented and more relationship oriented and less status and achievement oriented.
Maybe, yeah, there's one point that I keep thinking of when it comes to like the way that society talks about motherhood. Like I watch a lot of movies and TV shows, and there are times in the shows that I watch where like a female character spends the duration of the story being like a strong character that's like on par with the male leads, but then at the end of the story, like she retires to live a life that's defined by her role as a mother. And like a lot of the time when I'm reading reviews of those stories, a lot of pop culture writers denigrate that storytelling under the assumption that it is demeaning towards women for them to identify themselves by their role as a mother. There's always something that I find kind of interesting is like how much, like to what extent is it morally wrong to encourage people to define themselves by their relationship with other people? Do you think that we as a society should like encourage people to define themselves more, less by their achievements and more by their relationship with their loved ones and their like people in their close-knit communities?
Yeah. I don't have any shame in saying that. I think that would be a healthy thing for society. I think that our society would just be so much healthier and more sane if everyone, again, because I don't want to say just mothers, everyone was more focused on caregiving and relationships, and nurturing children and nurturing relationships with other people in their family and immediate community, as opposed to like trying to win in the capitalist economy. I just don't think that's good. I don't think it's good for society. I don't think it's good for people. I think, again, if you look to hunter-gatherer societies, these are cultures that are, again, extremely mentally healthy and that are extremely other-oriented, extremely relationship-oriented, community-oriented. And yes, mothers in these societies really define themselves by their role as mothers to a large extent. It's also true that in all of these societies, women are breadwinners, and in many cases are the primary breadwinners, again, because hunting is actually less efficient. And I think that's important for the sort of level of agency and power they have in these societies. So I do think, again, it's important that women be financially empowered. But women in hunter-gatherer societies define themselves much less by like their ability to gather tubers than by their status as mothers. And almost all women in hunter-gatherer societies want children. Most of them want more children than they actually have. For the most part, they relish their role as mothers. They love children. They love being mothers. I think that's our natural state. Like, I think we're supposed to want children. I think we're supposed to want children, and I think we're supposed to enjoy motherhood, and we're supposed to enjoy our children. And the fact that so many of us don't want children, or think children are obnoxious, or don't even like our own children, is a symptom of a sick society.
Elena Bridgers, thank you so much for taking the time to come onto this podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to hear more, make sure to follow this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else that you get your podcasts from. Until next time, goodbye.